You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your Taking Creative Liberties host, Abraham.
And I am your non-canon host, Shane.
A psychology podcast. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. I'm very excited about this topic today. We're talking about something that is interesting that humans do.
Yeah, and it's something that we've been doing for a very long time, which I thought was really fascinating. It's one of those things, I think, that humans have this capacity to engage in all these behaviors, right? So like we can do all these things and we've been doing them throughout the history of humanity, but it is really wonderful that we can kind of see this recur time and time again. When we think something is new, we're like, no, we've been doing that since 19 BCE, at least.
And shout out to my partner who gave me the idea for this episode, asking, where does this come from and what counts as fan fiction? And I was like, that seems like the makings of a podcast to me.
Yes. So thank you, partner. We appreciate you.
You know, the risk of being a podcaster, it turns out, is hearing any piece of information ever and thinking, I could do an episode on that.
Yeah, that's the dangers, right? That's what gets you sucked in. And here we are, 302 episodes later, talking about fan fiction.
It's sort of like when I was a teenager and I was into skateboarding, and I'd just look at a piece of architecture and think, I could skate that.
Yeah. So what I would do is when my friends were skateboarding, I'd be like, they can skate that. I couldn't, but they could.
Yeah, I was wrong, by the way. I was a terrible skateboarder and it never got very good.
Yeah, all my friends were hurt all the time. And I was like walking around being like, y'all all right? You need some ice packs?
Yes, lots of ice packs, lots of ibuprofen.
Yes.
Just to get through the day. Well, anyway, we're not talking about skateboarding. We're actually talking about fan fiction, as I said. This is going to be, I think, a really fun episode. And if you are joining us for the first time, welcome. I think I already said some of that stuff, but some things that you should know are that if you would like to support what we are up to, one way that you can do that is you can leave us a rating and review. You can subscribe. You can join us on Patreon. You can pick up some merch from our store. You can shave WWD podcast in the back of your head next time you get a haircut. And I'll talk more specifically about all the ways that you can support us at the end of this discussion.
Yes, I like that. I also had the thought that you can write your own Why We Do What We Do comic book that is set in an alternate universe. So that's totally fine with us. And we would love to see what that looks like.
That's an even better way to support us. So
yeah, we'll see what comes up. You know, Why We Do What We Do art.
Take a picture either way and tag us on social media and post it. And we would love to see that.
So before we get started, we have our days to celebrate. And this episode comes out on February 22nd, 2023, the day after my daughter's 17th birthday. So
hey, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Riley. But some other things. So we're not celebrating her birthday anymore. That was yesterday.
It's over. Old news.
So today is World Yoga Day. That's a cool thing. Yoga is cool. We did an episode on yoga many moons ago, so go check that out.
That's true. It is National Pink Day, so wear something pink, I guess.
Or just go listen to Pink. She's great.
There you go.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. It's also World Thinking Day, so thanks to the Girl Scouts on that one.
Apparently. National Walking the Dog Day, and maybe this time do it for free. Just kidding.
Yeah.
People need to get paid. Never mind. Let's reverse that. Pay your dog walker more. Give them a big tip.
Yes. I like that. It's also National Margarita Day. Not a big fan because I don't like salty drinks.
Understandable. And speaking of salty drinks, it is National Cook a Sweet Potato Day, which you should not drink.
I don't know how those things are related, but I'll go with that.
It can be salty.
Maybe there is a way to drink a sweet potato. I just don't know what that looks like yet.
You don't want to know.
I don't want to know. Yeah, please don't email us and answer that. It's Be Humble Day. Big fan of that. Like that.
Yep. It's Single Tasking Day, which is kind of what it sounds like. Apparently, it is the idea of getting one thing done at a time, unlike all the other days when you're trying to get everything done all at once.
Yeah. It's also Inconvenience Yourself Day, which is, every day for me.
Also interesting, I had to look this one up, and essentially describes going out of your way mildly to help somebody else, holding the door for them, giving up your seat for somebody in need, just doing something nice for somebody.
Yeah.
That's sort of what this is about.
Okay.
Now, last week we released this episode about feral species, and that was cool, and I hope that you caught that one. But what we missed was that apparently this week is actually National Invasive Species Awareness Week. So
yeah, timing.
Almost caught it.
Yeah, it's synchronicities. It's one of those things where it's like we just knew that it was coming up, so our prescient vision was just not quite there yet.
We need more of the spice.
Oh, yes, the spice melange. We need to go into the spice trance.
Anyway, we are actually talking about fan fiction as we began with. And Shane, I think you had a question for me.
I do. So we both consume lots of media and we enjoy lots of different things.
True.
And I'm just curious if there's a story that you can think of off the top of your head that you would like to see go differently. Because maybe you weren't satisfied with the ending or you had a different idea for what that world could look like. So is there anything that you can think of off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, man, there are several where I've sort of have found myself in the place of just trying to accept that it was written how it was written and like that's fine. I think very commonly I fall into that camp of people who wish that the ending of How I Met Your Mother would have been good. And so if I've seen and read people who rewrote that ending so that it was better.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that probably comes to the front of my mind.
Okay. I'm in that camp too. I've seen the same thing about Seinfeld. Having the same kind of like discussion around that show too.
Got it. Yeah. All right. So why are you asking me this?
Well, I'm asking because apparently that ending does exist somewhere. And since you've already read it and you've already experienced it, you've experienced this wonderful phenomenon that is called fan fiction. And we are going to talk about all things fan fiction today, what it is, why we do it, some science behind it, which is super interesting, and just kind of unpack that a little bit.
Awesome. So fan fiction, or fanfic, as you might hear it called, is a genre of fictional writing, usually written by amateur writers who are fans of a particular work of some sort, as we mentioned. And these works are already existing intellectual properties, often copyrighted, often very well known and like well within the public sphere and domain, if you will. So they basically take a story that they like and they expand on it.
Yep. So since authors, typically copyright some part or a variety of aspects of their works, they'll copyright their stories, the use of characters, things like that. They're not available to the public domain. So you can't just take let's take Harry Potter, for example. Mm-hmm. You can't just take Harry Potter stories and just write your own and then publish them without dealing with some copyright stuff. And this is where this comes up.
Absolutely.
So as a result, what ends up happening is the fan fiction genre, like the works that come out in this kind of realm, are often considered unauthorized, or a term you'll hear a lot is non-canon.
Right. And as a quick sort of sidebar on this is part of the reason why in 1 year you might get a bunch of movies that all come out about the same thing, is because all of the sudden it becomes public domain. The copyright expires, and then a character, a story becomes public domain, and you get a whole bunch of, let's say, Winnie the Pooh movies, with one of them maybe being like a scary Winnie the Pooh movie, because people can now write and do anything they want with those characters and stories and publish them and make money on it.
Yep, absolutely. And that's why you have that specific, what is it called? Blood and Honey?
I never saw it, but yeah, something like that.
There's also a Grinch one that came out called the Mean One. There's a horror Grinch movie that came out where it's like a retelling of like what actually happened, because they're saying like How the Grinch Stole Christmas was written from the perspective of the Grinch, and now they're telling the story from like the perspective of the people in Whoville and how he was like a serial killer and not like just some sympathetic creature, which I thought was pretty great.
Was it the case that Pinocchio became public domain, and that's why there were like 4 Pinocchio movies in 1 year?
Yeah, and they weren't Disney sanctioned, right? So like most people know that like Disney did the Pinocchio stories and they had the rights, but now all of a sudden you've got like, a Guillermo del Toro version, which is supposed to be really great.
Yeah, I've heard good things.
And then the Disney version, which is maybe not so great.
Yeah, indeed.
So you heard me say the term non-canon, and this is important, I think, here. When we talk about the word canon, you're going to hear the word canon a lot, spelled C-A-N-O-N. That is a collection or a list of what are described as sacred books accepted as genuine. And they're typically, the original term was describing a lot of religious texts. So, the Gnostic verses of the Bible are considered non-canon, where, Mary's midwife accidentally touches her vagina and burns her hand off, but then baby Jesus brings the hand back. That's considered non-canon. But the dragons in Revelations, those are canon. So just making sure that we're all on the same page with that.
And Lord Zeno from Psalms is also canon.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure.
Yeah.
Obviously not to be confused with a cannon that shoots things that you would find aboard a ship. But yeah, so canon That is referring to the sort of story that is considered accepted as part of that story and belonging to it. Now, important thing about canon, and we'll talk about this more as we go, but is that canon can be expanded by the original authors and by the original work. And what is considered the lore of a particular story or world or characters can be expanded by those authors or by the people who hold the intellectual property. And that's still considered then part of the actual genuine accepted story that just grows and grows. And this happened a lot with a lot of the sort of comic book superheroes,
Yes.
where they started to get backstories. And even though there would be a lot of mixing of those stories, where sometimes they'd have one origin story or a different one, sometimes they die, and then sometimes they'd just be back again, there has been some effort to sort of create a canon around how all these different versions exist and what accounts for them all.
Right.
So there's some tying it together. And anyway, that's sort of a thing to consider around that.
Right. So this term, canon, was adopted as a general term that was used in literature and movies and stuff. But essentially what this is saying is if something is canon, then that's the correct story. And so an example of this is recently Disney bought Star Wars. And so they own all the intellectual property of Star Wars. And what they did was they took a lot of the novelizations and the stories that were written and they made those the legends. That's like the legend side of it. So like, you know, General Thrawn and like Yuzan Vong and like a lot of the stuff that happens in Star Wars that were written, you know, those became legends. They were no longer canon. So if you have like old Star Wars books, they're probably not canon anymore. And so they kind of wiped out all of this fan fiction or made it fan fiction because they made it non-canon. And what is currently accurate are the movies that have come out and a couple comic books that are tie-ins for that. So they really kind of like made and kind of like streamlined a correct timeline for the Star Wars world.
Wild. So I never thought about the fact that something that could be canon could become later no longer canon. I sort of always thought of canon as being additive.
Yes.
You can sort of expand it, but it doesn't necessarily shrink. That's an interesting twist.
Yeah. Another example of that is Superman used to be able to, he had a superpower where he could produce miniature Supermen. He no longer has that power.
Isn't that just called being a father?
Yeah, you think so. I guess he could still do that, but like it was just like mini clones at some point in time.
Oh, I see.
We'll have to eventually do like an episode on censorship in comics because it created some wild things. That's why you have the Condiment Man and the Polka Dot Man as villains.
I would love to see just censorship in general as a topic because there's some interesting stuff has come out of that.
Yes.
All right. So as we said, the fan fiction, the stuff that we've been trying to talk about, we keep getting distracting ourselves, is work that often falls outside of that original canon story. So they're often disregarded as something that the public would even want to have access to. And so with copyright laws, fan fiction works are more often difficult to access for periods of time due to the cease and desist orders from copyright owners who would be concerned about someone else essentially making money and telling stories about their characters and stories that belonged to them.
Right. So I have not yet gotten a cease and desist for my fan fiction, Henry Porter, which is about a magical student. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if J.K. Rowling picks that up. So anyway, before we go into the history of this term fan fiction and what this looks like, it's probably worth it for us to take a break so you can hear some non-canon ads.
So we've been talking about what canon is, and one of the things I wanted to know is how long this term has existed. Where did it come from?
Yeah, it's been around for less than 100 years. So the term originated in 1939 and was used as a disparaging way to refer to works written by what they described as amateurs. And specifically, this came up in the genre of science fiction, which, I didn't expect it to take this turn, but here we are.
And I think that I said canon. I meant to say fan fiction, where the term fan fiction came from. That's from 1939, right? Yes.
The term fan fiction was coined in 1939 as a response to what they described as amateur writers.
Got it. Right. And it sort of makes sense given the history here, because the science fiction genre during this time was very, very competitive. We just saw a lot of people trying to write about sci-fi and get some notoriety from it. And this time was often referred to even as the golden age of science fiction. And it sprang out of this pulp era of the 20s and early 30s. And I think this is often where you get your John Carters and some of your initial characters who I think began the idea of like superhero characters and that sort of thing.
So it was during this time that the term hard SF, which, now we have hard AF, which is a whole different thing. But hard SF or hard science fiction was coined, and heroes were, found using logic, reason, using science, using achievable technologies to resolve whatever conflict they may have encountered. And so you see a lot of the works that are coming out at this time are based and grounded in some reality. It's not a lot of kind of like overarching, like wild stuff going on. You're talking about like kind of like Star Trek, which was considered more like a hard sci-fi type of thing because there were so many like grounded reality technologies.
Yeah, sort of a basic extrapolation of things that we know to already be in existence and true, as opposed to completely fabricated out of whole cloth and based on nothing that we believe to be true.
Yep.
Also, hard SF, I think, is a cocktail in San Francisco.
It probably is. If you are from California, let us know where we can get one.
So to illustrate how impactful this time was in terms of understanding the proliferation of science fiction writing, here are just a few authors that put out some of their most famous work during the boom of science fiction writing. We had, at his peak, the illustrious Isaac Asimov, Robert A. Heinlein, L. Ron Hubbard, Philip K. Dick, Arthur C. Clarke, Ray Bradbury, C.S. Lewis, B.F. Skinner, and George Orwell. And yes, I did say L. Ron Hubbard in there.
Yeah, because everybody forgets that he was a sci-fi writer before he was a cultist. So I think it's important to note too, like, these authors put out a lot of different works over a pretty large period of time. The golden age of sci-fi was about 1938 through about 1950 and a little bit after. And that's why we can include people like George Orwell and B.F. Skinner in this, because their works were put out kind of after that. But these people that you named, these hoity-toity sci-fi legends, they were writing works like I, Robot, the Foundation series, Martian Chronicles, Wallen 2, 1984, Red Planet, which led to Fahrenheit 451, Starship Troopers, I Am Legend. Yes. You've got like a lot of really great works that are happening in this time. We saw some of the greatest authors of the genre duking it out in the public eye, in like magazines, sci-fi magazines and stuff like that, and attempting to hold each other to a higher quality. And so those that were not on that level were snubbed, and thus fan fiction the term fan fiction was born. And this is where they were going, oh, you're amateur, because they consider themselves pro sci-fi writers.
Yeah, right.
And so fan fiction was the amateur ones, and that was kind of like their insult.
I get it. They're like, you want to be writers, so you're like fans of science fiction. You're just writing your own version of it that's not like up to snuff. So it's just kind of fan fiction, sort of pejorative.
Right, which is really funny when you think about it, because it's a bunch of nerds who are basically icing out a whole bunch of other nerds.
The cool nerds.
Yeah, they're the cool nerds. Okay, like Isaac Asimov couldn't get a seat at the table because he was a jerk, because he was so nerdy and so smart. He found it so hard to relate to people, but he was like, no, you're not that cool. And like it's just, he was actually one of the nicer ones out of that group. I think Robert Heinlein was one of the ones that was like a real piece of work. But
interesting. I never read, just looking at this list here, I've never read Starship Troopers, but I loved that movie when it came out. And weirdly, I know a lot of people who didn't like it, and I heard it was because it was marketed as being this like action sci-fi movie. But when I saw it, I immediately saw it for the satirical work that it was. Yeah. Like, it's just funny and goofy. Like, it's making fun of a lot of like an extrapolation of like a current government, or like a military government, basically. Yeah. And the super machismo behavior. And like, I thought it was super funny for that reason.
Yeah. It's an excellent work.
Talked about this before, but I Am Legend being one of the greatest sci-fi books ever.
Yes.
Horror sci-fi.
Yeah. If you like vampires, it's great.
Not zombies.
Yes. As you may know, it may assume, it's vampires, y'all.
Yeah. Anyway, let's talk about genres of fan fiction, because I actually kind of thought that maybe this started with, I guess I wasn't really sure where this started, but I kind of suspected that this had to do with people who were doing anything that looked like trying to copy or recreate the works of various people as far back as even maybe Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. And that's not really what it is. But then there was the sci-fi genre that we've been talking about there, but there's also other types of genres as well.
Yeah, so we're going to get into the reasons why people do this, and why they might decide to write fan fiction and stuff like that, but we think it's worth diving into some of those genres that exist in this world. And specifically, what makes fan fiction interesting is that the works are nested within the world of the original copyrighted work, but often include some type of what we can describe as twist, right?
What a twist.
What a twist. So these works are variations on the theme, and the story is maybe from a different perspective, or maybe it's the same universe but a different kind of literary genre. So fan fiction is classified not by the genre of work in terms of like, it's not fiction, sci-fi, da-da-da-da-da. That already exists because of the property. It's kind of going, here's this thing, and then underneath it, we're going to talk about romance. We're going to talk about, smut. We're going to talk about all these other things. So it's kind of like an extension or an added genre, if you will.
Yeah, it could be a genre twist. An example of this might be to look at The Wizard of Oz and Wicked. This is the same universe, but from totally different perspectives. Maleficent's kind of a similar thing in there, I think.
Yeah, and you've been seeing that kind of that like work of the formula quite a bit, right? Like they did the Cruella de Vil movie.
Yeah.
They're doing like from the perspective of the villain to make them more sympathetic. And that starts as like kind of a fan fiction thing.
Cool.
It's here's this original work and here's like a different look at this same story, because we always know there's two sides. So the thing is, and part of the reason why fan fiction comes up is resources are finite. So you're not going to get every single movie from every single character or every single perspective. It simply can't happen. You're not going to get the same versions of a story or a different version of the story, because a lot of times Hollywood and publishers don't have the opportunity to produce all these things. Some trickle out though. But fan fiction tackles this by taking an existing story, expanding it, altering it, taking a minor character, adding some kind of different flavor to it, changing it up, and they do it in a few different ways. And so we're going to talk about each of those.
I love this. So, and this makes a lot of sense. I can totally see this even happening and how this sort of works. So there's the alternate universe, or AU, not astronomical unit for you.
Yeah.
Super sciencey
for you nerds.
Astronomy people.
Yeah, we're the cool nerds.
That's right. The alternate universe. This is a genre where an existing canon story takes place under different circumstances. So, for example, if Anakin never became Darth Vader, if Tony Stark never died, spoiler alert, I guess, if Woody stays with Andy in Toy Story, 50 Shades of Grey never exists.
Yeah.
So I think we can think of lots of examples of what it might be like if we were to reimagine. There's actually this movie relatively recently called, I want to say it was Brightburn, maybe. It was
Yes.
it was like a horror version of like a superhero story.
Yeah.
And it has a very Superman scent, like the character is basically Superman as a kid.
Yeah.
But becomes this, when he sort of realizes and discovers and uses power, becomes this unholy terror. And so there's sort of a different twist on the idea of the superhero.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking of Superman, there are two comics that I can think of right now that are totally alternate universe. Kingdom Come, which is like an older Superman, and he's like kind of disenfranchised.
Is it where he makes mini-me's?
Yeah, no, that's different. That's like the 1950s Superman where he's like, he's at a sock hop. And the other one is Red Sun. If you've never read Red Sun, Superman doesn't land in Kansas. Super lands in the Soviet Union. Ooh. So he doesn't have an S on his chest. He's got a hammer and sickle, and it's and Batman's an anarchist trying to take down the Russian government.
Fun.
But those are alternate universes. Those are different examples. And this is the thing. They start as stories about characters that exist in a canon, and sometimes the places will go, I love that idea. We'll publish that for you, and it'll get out. And it happens all the time in comic books.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, I think maybe one of the best, most famous examples of this is Spider-Man's multiple iterations of Spider-Man, and like the Into the Spider-Verse movie, where they brought in so many different Spider-Man iterations from different universes, which super good movie, incidentally.
So much fun.
If you haven't seen it, high recommend.
100%. Same. Another genre type in fan fiction is angst, and essentially the story revolves around making the reader feel angst due to the suffering of the main character. So maybe some story came out with a happy ending, and they're like, no, we're not doing that anymore. Yeah. That person does not get and so they rewrite the story so that person, that main character, gets to suffer a little bit.
Yeah, you just take some beloved character who's really nice and put them through torture, basically. Just for the sake of watching him squeal.
Basically, yeah, you take The Office and you just make Michael Scott miserable the entire time, and he never gets to leave Dunder Mifflin. That will be an example of angst.
Or Jim and Pam, because they were the sort of beloved characters, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They never get married, they never move out, they stay there, and they can't be with each other. That's an example of angst.
Yep. All right, another genre here is crossover. This includes a mixture of two totally different canons. At least there can be even more.
Yeah.
Kingdom Hearts, that video game, comes to mind as an example of where that sort of has happened.
Yeah.
And the amalgam universe in comics that includes mashups of the DC and Marvel comic characters, considered generally within the respective genres or comics to be completely separate from one another. And yet here we have them side by side, and that creates this non-canon event where they all exist together. And there's similar ideas. I think a lot of people writing fiction that cross over different people in different timelines. Bill and Ted sort of does this, bringing these different stories together. Or where you have people who bring in Jurassic Park. So you've got dinosaurs and stormtroopers and etc., like all sort of mashed together in one setting. And we can sort of run with it because it's all fiction anyway.
You know, I was going to say that Jetsons and the Flintstones are an example of that, but that's not true because they're the same universe.
We talked about this, yeah. We and actually I think we brought it up talking about a fan fiction writing about the idea that they did belong to the same universe.
Yeah. So I was like, at first I was like, no, it's not quite it. But yeah, it's like a merging of two things. It would be like if Harry Potter went to, Oz and dealt with his magic there. That would be an example. Like, and there's all different ways to do it. And you'll see different examples of that. So
there's kind of another example of this. This episode in particular is a lot of referencing pop culture that is probably very US centric, but I'm going to do it anyway. There is in the show Parks and Recreation, Patton Oswalt comes on and he filibusters the town council by talking about his fan fiction crossover where the Mandalorian and Harry Potter and the Marvel universe come together in some way. If I remember correctly, there's at least some of those. Yeah,
it's like basically it starts off with Boba Fett's hand climbing out of the maw of the Sarlacc pit, and then it starts, and then it's like a whole thing. It's fantastic, and that did happen. See, that's the thing. Sometimes these stories actually come into the real world. That's in the book of Boba Fett. They show Boba Fett climbing out of the Sarlacc pit.
Yep,
it's great.
It's true.
Anyway, cool nerds. All right, so speaking of crossovers, what we're going to do is we are going to cross over with some ads in this capitalist world, and hopefully it produces something that you actually like.
Wouldn't it have been fun if we actually had been able to cross over our voices into those ads? So it was like, it seemed like you couldn't tell if the episode was happening or ads were happening. It would have been very confusing.
Yeah, one day we'll just write fake ads and we'll just drop them in there and see how that goes.
That would be a lot of fun. There's a podcast I listen to that does fake ads that I always very much enjoy.
Me too. Yeah.
I didn't want to steal their thunder and do it with us, but it would be a fun experiment anyway.
Yeah, we'll try that one day.
This show brought to you by Fanfiction.
Whipple.
All right, another genre of fan fiction, because we've been talking about genres. This isn't a radio show, so it's not like you're tuning in just for the first time. But just in case you forgot what we were talking about between our sidebars and our ads and our ramblings, we were talking about genres of how fan fiction can happen. And we were talking about crossovers, and another one is fluff or WAF. WAF standing for warm and fuzzy feelings. So you can kind of imagine where this one's going just from that description alone.
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal is to make the reader happy, right? So that's the ultimate thing. We're going to make the reader happy because maybe some property had like some really dismal ending. And so, you're going to take some characters' demise and undo that. You're going to save them. They survived. We save Snape. We save Dumbledore. Everybody lives. And that's one of those things. So it's kind of like subverting those really tough, because there's characters that are incredibly beloved that people don't want to die off. So it's a kind of a take on that where they're like, we're going to save them. And it's going to be warm and fuzzy and beautiful.
I could probably see this being also something like down the road, the happy ending this person has that led to them, like they got to be with a person that they love or have the career that they want or get the family that they want or have the, whatever it is, there's some reconciliation down the road.
Absolutely.
Another version, we'd mentioned this angst one where you just want to make your person suffer. Well, there's sort of a twist on that called hurt/comfort. And that's an angsty version. In this case, the main character suffers, but then there's some comfort at the end. So you make them a little bit squeamish so that you can, pull the Band-Aid off. Maybe that's not right. You can rub ointment on it at the end and it feels better.
It's a salve.
Whatever it is. There you go.
Yeah. And I think this is important because, you might be going, well, this sounds like what people do with regular stories. Yeah, it is. The difference is that with fan fiction, they're just taking something that already exists and in many of those aspects fixing it.
Yeah, that's really it. It's slathering the literary traditions that exist on top of an existing property to put some spin or twist or expansion on it.
Yeah.
That again is not considered part of the actual story.
Right. Yeah. If you've ever walked out of a movie and gone, they should have done this, you're writing fan fiction. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you're at least like involved in that process.
Yeah, you should just commit and start a blog.
Yeah, exactly. Or a podcast. And if you do something called Podfix.
Hey.
Podfix are specifically referencing the audio versions of a fan fiction where a story is fleshed out and presented in a serialized kind of audio format. So I believe Wastelanders is an example of one right now where they're kind of diving into the Marvel world, where they spend some time with a specific character and it's not canon to the current story, but it's like kind of an expansion. So that's an example of one that exists.
So we could do a podfic if we wanted to. We have the expertise.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
All right. There is PWP. Plot? What plot? Or porn without plot.
Yeah. Yep. Pretty much.
This is one of the things that I thought was going to be where fan fiction came from because, and we should probably talk about this at some point in an episode, pornography has driven an enormous amount of human ingenuity.
Yes.
So much more than you would think. And so I was like, well, if I had to guess where fan fiction started, probably with porn.
Yeah.
Seems like it actually wasn't with porn, so I was wrong. But there is a version of it that is, of course, porn that you're going to be able to find pretty much anywhere you look. But yeah, it's focused primarily on sex. That's the entire point of the story, is just to have two characters get down. Captain America is a pizza delivery guy in these ones, very commonly.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what they'll probably do is they'll take scenes from stories, either written or TV or movie or something, that had the setup to become something racier than they didn't in the story.
Yeah.
And then the creative the creative fan takes the liberty with that and says, no, this is how it could have played out in the much more explicit version.
And honestly, here's the thing about this. Like, you think about this and you might be going, well, that's just explicit and unnecessary. But there's some really, like, if you find like the folks that do this well, there's really great writing in this stuff. So like it takes like a literary mind to be able to put this type of thing on paper and to affect somebody. Same thing with like any sort of emotion or like to portray those types of things, from the paper. It takes a skill. So like, I don't want everybody to go and be like, oh, it's just porn.
Yeah.
Don't think of it like that. Like it's a creative process too.
Although it can be sleazy for the sake of being sleazy.
But some people just do it. Yeah, yes, yeah, absolutely. People are like, yeah, we're going to make this really, really raunchy.
A lot of teenage boys are making YouTube videos where various cartoons go at it.
Yes. There's also slash or femme slash, and these stories actually include sexual or romantic relationships that might be non-sexual between characters of the same gender. And so the term slash originated from the idea of male to male, and femme slash is female to female. But the slash genre is a little bit more complex than that, especially when it's starting to encounter and encompass the more gender non-conforming folks.
Speaking of which, I realize now that I said that teenage boys do this. Anybody could be writing these. I shouldn't gender that activity, and anybody could be interested in writing their own little porn.
Yeah,
about cartoons.
Yeah, whatever works.
Or whatever that is. Speaking of which, there's also smut/lemon. This is similar to porn without plot or PWP. Then again, specifically referring to sexually explicit fanfic. Yep.
And then there's songfic, and songfic is where you get to write musicals. But I actually thought this one was really interesting because it's not just musicals. My first thought was like, oh yeah, we're going to turn, I don't know, like, Shawshank Redemption into a musical. Instead, what they do is they take a song or songs as part of the major plot of the story, whether the plot is based on a specific song itself, like they might take lyrics from a song and write a story based on those lyrics, which we've seen people do that with poems and stuff, and we'll talk about that later. It's a musical or some other variation of that, where essentially music and song is like a main driving factor of that story.
I feel like Weird Al has done versions of something like this.
Yeah, I feel like Eat It is a story of somebody who is like really struggling with food stuff, but it's put to the tune of Michael Jackson.
Wow. And then on There's a YouTube channel I really like called Honest Trailers, and they'll sometimes, when there's movies that have a lot of music in them, they'll rewrite the song so that it's more making fun of the plot of the movie. I feel like that would count as songfic based on this.
Yeah, that's in that realm.
Just like any other creative endeavor, there really are no restrictions to genres or how someone might engage with this type of content creation. We listed some, but there's probably a lot more versions of this out there that could look very different from anything that we even talked about. Those are just some examples of types of genres. So don't think that was an exhaustive list. What makes it fan fiction is the inclusion of an existing canon property, not the format in which it's produced. So it doesn't matter, like if it's normally comic book and then it gets turned into a song or a podcast or something, that can totally still be fan fiction. It doesn't have to be writing to writing or video to video.
Right.
Any retelling of that story where you decide to add, adjust, change, or put your own spin on existing characters is a version of the fan fiction or fanfic.
Right. Absolutely. I believe right now, and I know I keep referencing Marvel because I feel like there's a lot of examples of it, not just like, it's a comic book with multiple universes. For example, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Scott Lang, who plays Ant-Man, wrote a book inside and has a podcast inside the Marvel universe. And I'm pretty sure that they have the book for pre-order in real life.
Whoa.
So you can actually order, like, it's something called like No Small Feat or something like that. Like something ridiculous. I forget exactly what it is, but I think you can order, and that's an example of fan fiction where you're taking a different perspective that is part of an existing property and you're producing it. But the difference is, because Disney owns the property, they have made that canon. So that's where, if somebody else had written that book and Disney didn't, then it wouldn't be canon.
Yeah. Man, life imitating art. That is
wild.
That is interesting.
It's been an interesting few years, for sure.
For sure. Agreed.
So you might be going, why would anybody write fan fiction? And on the surface, it seems like a lot of work.
Yeah, right?
And we were talking about this before the show started. We were like, man, I couldn't imagine writing a book to just be like, man, I did not like The Last Jedi so much that I'm going to rewrite this entire thing and write a book on it, right? I actually really like The Last Jedi, but people dislike it. So
yeah, I agree.
When you think about this too, right? Think about this for a second. You write a fan fiction, it's possible that book will never be published. It can never be officially published because of all the copyrights.
Yeah.
You create hours and hours of content only for the copyright owner to reach out and tell you to quit through legal action. So here's a cease and desist. Why would somebody even bother doing this? Well, it might not be the things that you think. It might not be like, oh, I want to make money on this. It might be something else.
Absolutely. And so here specifically are a few of the reasons that someone writes fan fiction. One is for representation. And in some instances, stories may be centered around a character that fits a particular demographic. The story itself might include various characters of diverse backgrounds, or include none at all, which definitely happens.
Yep.
The opportunity to tell a story within a specific universe from a representative perspective offers the ability to be included within a story in a meaningful way. So you can sort of say, like, there are no, this has never happened, but there are no white people in this story. Like, I want to write a version of this where there's white people.
Yeah.
God, that was a terrible example that I wish I hadn't said. Instead, you might have people who were instead more often than not, and definitely in America, there are almost no black people in the story, or they have very little to do. I want to write this so that it's more inclusive of that particular background. Might be where someone's coming from. And so oftentimes the opportunity for representation was missed in the original work. And the fan fiction is an opportunity to alleviate that and provide a unique perspective that does include people from different backgrounds.
You see that a lot in the community, where in the fan fiction community, where you'll see a lot of focus on representation and different perspectives or different versions of the story with more representation, which I think is cool. Another reason why somebody does decide to dive into this world is the idea of backstories, untold stories, unresolved stories, because all of us have left some piece of creative work where we've gone, I want to know more about this character. They were my favorite. Give me more.
Yeah.
And that's why sequels exist, right? Or prequels and all those things. So some characters become quite interesting, and authors or creatives want to know more about their journey. We want to know more about them. And so this kind of work around fan fiction is already done through sequels, spin-offs, and stuff like that. We kind of see that, but those resources are limited. We may never get those stories. We may never get a continuation of those things. And so fanfic allows the opportunity to hear from Slow and Low, who is the Beastie Boys inspired Star Wars character from Last Jedi, I want to know more about Slow and Low, is all I'm saying.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like some of the stuff that's been coming out from Disney on some of the Star Wars characters feels like fan fiction come to life, but because they own the property, then it is considered canon, as we've been talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
As a better example of representation, I just decided that if I were to write like Game of Thrones fan fiction, they'd all be pacifist vegans, and everyone would hate it. That would be my representation.
Yeah, lot of peace negotiations that were successful. A lot of resource sharing. It's great.
Exactly. In a very boring way, the kingdom comes to a happy close with everybody getting some compromised ending.
Sharing of thrones.
Sharing of thrones. That's super good. Another reason that someone might be interested in doing this is just to create what they consider to be a more interesting version of that piece of literature or art or whatever it is. And it's entirely possible that a bit of canon work could maybe leave something to be desired in terms of feeling resolved or complete or complex and what have you. And maybe the author has a different idea regarding where the story was headed or some other idea for some kind of resolution. And so the fan comes in and they embellish and they add to it and they make it feel richer and more satisfying.
Yeah, and so they get an opportunity to try again with characters they love in a story that they value, and I think that's kind of cool. If you are somebody who has that feeling where you're like, man, I really hated the end of that movie, this is where you can kind of take a stab at like some type of fanfic. Like you can actually go in and be like, I was really unhappy with the ending of The Rock by Michael Bay. I really wanted Sean Connery's character to have a happy ending and stay with his daughter and not have to like sneak off and be on the run forever. Like maybe I want him to have amnesty. So now you write that fanfic and here we are.
If you're listening and you're inspired by this right now, go out and write some really awesome fan fiction about Jurassic World and save that franchise from its writers.
Yes, please write out Dominion. Oh my God.
Let's see if we can get this thing back on track somehow. Because what a cool property it was, and what a weird wormhole it's gone down.
What if that's actually how we got there? What if like part of their genetic stuff was they had like some Black Ops science group and they accidentally opened a wormhole to a dimension where Jurassic World was not run over by dinosaurs, but there were just a couple that lived in the forest?
Sure. I like it. You've now seeded the fertile ground of imagination for people to write a new movie that hopefully fixes what's been going on.
Yeah. So while you all ruminate on that and you figure out what your next fanfic is, we're going to take a quick ad break and we'll come back in a second.
Okay, we've been talking about reasons that people write fan fiction. They put in all of this time and effort. One of them, and actually this one really resonates to me personally, is the idea for creative opportunities and skill building. Maybe you aren't a writer or you aren't a creative, you aren't a creator of some kind. Because again, it can be podcasts, it can be YouTube videos, it could be blogs, whatever it is that you're going to make. It could be songs. You maybe pick up your guitar and you write fan fiction that way, or piano or ukulele, whatever your thing is. But for a novice or amateur writer, beginning to work in fan fiction gives them an opportunity to write without having to do all the creative legwork. And it's sort of getting your toes wet and like, I already have a lot of the stuff done that I needed to have done to have my characters work within a setting. Now I just get to manipulate the characters, or alternatively, you use established characters and you just get to manipulate your setting, whatever you want to do. But in this, a creative world exists and a new story can be generated inside of that world. And that allows the writer to focus on the technique and storytelling and solicit feedback from their community. And it's not intended to necessarily do anything other than give them practice in trying to do writing by standing on the shoulders of the people they admire.
Right. Absolutely. Many times it's an homage and they're just like, I hope that I can do as well as this area or this thing. I want to see what this character does in a different setting or in a different circumstance. And I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
Another one, too, is engaging with communities. And this is something that I think is really important, too, because human beings being social creatures to some degree, one of the noted benefits of fanfic writing is that communities exist around this and people share ideas and they connect about their shared grief, about the loss of a character or the backstory that they're desperately wanting or whatever it might be about a particular property. And so passionate fans come together to share ideas. They tell stories about their favorite characters. They develop new creative works. They get together. They create this kind of like nice community that is a shared interest that is really powerful for them. And sometimes becomes, it leads to other really cool, unique intellectual properties that they can develop on their own, that buds from meeting in these communities. I mean, think about all the comic book characters who have been created based on people who just love comic books, and they started writing their own superheroes, and they started writing, and they go on and do their own thing. I mean, Robert Kirkman is an example of somebody who was writing superhero comics and then went off to go do Walking Dead and Invincible by himself.
Wow. I didn't know that.
You know what I mean? So those are things that, like, I mean, that happens a lot with comic book authors and writers and stuff. They'll write like a specific, I think Jonathan Hickman is another one too, who wrote for like Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and did all these things, and then went off to go do East of West and Manhattan Projects and all these really cool things that he's doing on his own.
Nice. It makes a lot of sense. And it's kind of related to this idea of sort of the creative opportunities and skill building but you get to do it like professionally a little bit more.
Yeah.
And of course, another reason to do this is why not?
Yeah.
Get out there and do it. That's fun.
Yeah. It's fun. You get to have fun with it. And if you like it, do it. And the reason I put this one as last one here is because I was thinking, like, there's so many times where people do things and they get shamed for doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's things that you like.
Yeah.
There's, this pervasive idea of guilty pleasures is so bogus because, like, you shouldn't feel guilty about the things that you like.
Yeah. I agree.
And that's just, it's that simple. And so, like, if you like writing fan fiction, go do it. Don't listen to the cool nerds. Go be your own cool nerd.
If you like something that wasn't quite satisfying to you and you wish it went a little bit differently, then you now have the power.
Yeah.
Go out and make that change. Even if it's just for you. Like, that's totally fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's dig into a little bit of science here, because there is some science of fan fiction.
Yes. As I was doing some research on this, I found that there is a particular researcher that has a vested interest in this, and that is Rebecca Black.
Cool.
Black in 2016 argues that pop culture and technology provided a really cool beneficial context for English language learners, or ELLs, who are able to develop more diversive cultural backgrounds and identities and develop further literacies compared to those that were not embedded within the online fanfic community. So basically the argument was the online fanfic community was super supportive of people kind of exploring and being creative and developing their own identities, which I thought was really, really unique and fascinating. And in 2006, where the online communities are still kind of really growing and expanding, like they're not quite where they are today, I thought that was a pretty powerful statement. And we can kind of see the evidence of that today, I think.
That's great. And apparently in Black, also, same, Rebecca Black, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same one.
In 2009, conducted a longitudinal study where they evaluated the engagement of 3 young participants in an online fanfic community. And they found that participation with the community improved the development of their personal identities. They created social relationships and allowed them to experiment with various creative opportunities across genres and formats. So it it served a lot of different functions for them and it was a creative outlet, but also created a place where they could sort of enjoy something social with a group of like-minded individuals.
And as we were learning more about different populations and different groups that that really value shared interests, this makes even more sense. Like you kind of start seeing this come up where it's like this sense of community for folks that really value a certain shared interest. Now, Barnes in 2015 argues that fan fiction is a type of imaginative play, and it requires emotional engagement with and resistance to source material. So you're going to have people that are going to be really invested in the source material and they love it so much and they want to expand on it. And you're going to have people that love a source material and they hate what happened to it, so they want to fix it. And so you've got these kind of two camps around that, which I thought was really cool. And what ends up happening is these branching ideas, the stories that are created from the original work, they can be supporting, dissenting, or entirely separate from the original work, all of those things. But all of these require unique cognitive abilities that have to do with imaginative play and creativity and thinking and plotting and all that stuff. And so engagement in fan fiction can be compared to daydreaming and pretend play in children, though more research is needed in this area. There's not enough research on this, but they kind of compare it to those types of behaviors and cognitive processes.
There is, I've sort of thrown Jurassic Park Jurassic World specifically under the bus a little bit, but there are a couple of board games that were based off of Jurassic Park and Jurassic World called Dinosaur Island and Dinosaur World, respectively.
Okay.
They are very, very clearly taking heavy homage from those properties, but not copying the IP directly. They're fantastic games. So if you're into board games and you are into the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park and maybe Jurassic World somehow, those board games I think are they're really, really well designed, awesome games. They're on the more complex end. So if you're into games that are a little bit longer and more complex, then that's where you want to be. But if you're not into games that require a lot of thinking and planning and doing and spending a lot of time doing that, then you probably want to go with something else.
Yeah, I think it's fair. when you think about stuff like that too, like there are people kind of do this naturally. So it's like always fun when that stuff crops up where you're like, oh, I know where you got this. I know where that came from.
Yeah.
And then it's always weird when it's like so much better than what could have come out. You're like, man, like why couldn't they have done this movie?
I'm often a little skeptical of like direct, like tie-in type things, like products, because I feel like they're just meant to be a cash grab. And it's clear that this was not that. And a lot of work went into making it really high quality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we do have some other sort of fun and interesting tidbits about fan fiction. One of them, which I had heard this, but I never looked into, was that 50 Shades of Grey originally started as fan fiction work. Can you speak to where this, like, what was this fan fiction of?
So it actually came from fan fiction of the Twilight series.
What?
I know, which is like a really fantastic thing. So the author was publishing like erotic fan fiction about the Twilight saga on different pages and whatnot, and it ended up becoming its own story and kind of expanding from there. Maybe one day you're going to write the next not quite BDSM, really poorly designed story, like whatever it is that 50 Shades of Grey actually is. You could write that story and have a whole bunch of people leaving different vegetables in the movie theaters when it gets put to film.
Vegetables. So that is actually a very good example of the porn without plot that we were talking about.
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. Porn without plot. The PWP.
Boom, shots fired.
Yeah, take that. Honestly, like that's kind of what happens. Like, I mean, you might be a creative who's like got an idea for something, and then you're like, okay, this is it. I mean, I would imagine that whenever you see the phrase "inspired by," or like when somebody says, "Oh, these are like the works that I'm inspired by," they probably wrote some version of fan fiction about that at some point in time.
Oh, that's a really good point. That probably is the case. I think you're right.
Now, I think this is really important, though. There are a lot of really popular versions of books and stories that are out there that have made it to press and have made it out there and have gained a lot of traction. First of all, Paradise Lost by John Milton was published in 1667 and is a retelling of Adam and Eve, as well as a retelling of Satan and the angels who rebelled against God. Could you imagine publishing this in 1667 and the kind of flack that you would get?
Well, and that's interesting because that dramatically precedes what we were talking about with what fan fiction actually is. If it came about when we're talking about with science fiction, it really does, as I was originally thinking, it does potentially go back much, much further when you had people essentially just taking those stories and writing their own versions of them a long time ago. It just wasn't called fan fiction back then. Yeah. But yeah, that is interesting.
We're going to keep rolling it back. We're talking over 2,000 years this was going on.
Oh, great. Okay. So we have Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which I did not see. This is by Seth Graham Smith. And that, of course, is based on Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah. And it got a lot of traction.
Yeah. A lot of people enjoyed it.
And then they did, I believe they did a movie, Abraham. That's where Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter came from as well.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So, which is also a fan fiction. It is not Abraham Lincoln the president. Abraham Lincoln is a vampire hunter.
Sure. Yeah.
Love that. I love that idea. There's also City of Bones from the series The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare. And this was actually based on Harry Potter. And also, there was a Harry Potter fanfiction that came out called Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, which which I thought was so good because it's like, Harry Potter's not doing magic, he's doing science. And I really like that idea.
Super nerd. Love it.
Yeah. So good.
Xanid by Virgil, published in 19 BCE.
Yeah.
So very old. I think fairly well-known piece of work. So Virgil loved Homer's works and decided to write a story about some of the minor characters and wrote the Aeneid. I need, I think is what it is. I need to understand what this is about.
And I think that's an example, right? So you watch a movie and you're like, I watched Jurassic World Dominion and I go, you know what I really want to know about? I want to know about that one locust, the first one that caught fire and was like, how much that sucked. So I want to know about that one. And so I'm going to go back, or I want to write a story about the lab assistant that was working on this, going, like, having the moral crisis going, should we be doing this?
Yeah.
I want that story, and that's kind of what Virgil did here.
Or like the backstory of Tom Cruise's character in Tropic Thunder. Like, how did that guy become an agent to Hollywood stars?
Exactly. That's what Virgil did in 19 BCE. So, if you didn't know this little story called Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, this was also an example or a form of how fan fiction worked. It was actually based on the poem The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet by Arthur Brooke. So, I had no idea. I thought it was I thought it was an original work, but here we are.
There's also some Greek tragedies that were very similar to Romeo and Juliet that preceded that by quite a long time. So I'm guessing that use different character names. But anyway, I think that story's been told a few times.
Yeah.
The Dark Tower series by Stephen King. This really surprised me in reading this. Apparently, the idea for this was based on a poem titled Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came by Robert Browning.
Yes.
Which I'd not heard of. And the Dark Tower series is awesome.
Yes, it's wonderful. And that poem, Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came by Robert Browning, was inspired by William Shakespeare's King Lear. And it's specifically this sonnet. Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came, his word was still fi-fo fum, I smell the blood of a British man.
Okay. Wild. That is wild that's sort of where the history of where things come from.
Doesn't it feel good to know that there's no original ideas?
It feels so good.
Yeah, it's my favorite. It's my favorite feeling. Yes, I feel so creative right now.
Yeah, this is why things are the way that they are.
Yeah. This makes me go back to my philosophy. Yeah, there it is. Why we do what we do is because it's just copy and paste with new spices.
Yeah, with coffee stains.
Yeah. I think for me, the big thing with fan fiction is that it is this really incredible creative endeavor that allows people to exercise different skills, whether it's creativity, whether it's practical skills in writing and stuff like that. But it allows people to kind of continue and stay in a world that might have a finite ending based on the original creators or the authors, right? So like somebody might say, you know what, that's it. We're not doing any more Star Wars movies, but we have the opportunity as people who are fans of the work to go in and say, you know what, that's not all. I've got a lot more to say about this. Here's an interesting story I think should be told. And I really like that about this.
I agree. I think one of the things, just as a general take home point to say like what about fan fiction is that this is an almost very natural thing that's going to happen. That people, part of, I think, what we do that is social and in our behavior is that we take what others have done and we sort of run with it. We expand on it. We replicate it. We see this in science. We see it in art. We see it in just general behavior. Like we try to emulate our behavior after people we look up to. We maybe try and tell jokes like our favorite comedians, or we see someone who handles stress really well, and we were like, I want to be better at handling stress like that person does. And so this seems to me like a very natural extension of a lot of things that humans do, which is like take what other people do and their behavior and incorporate your own version of it. And I think that's just being a human being,
right?
And I think it's really cool and wonderful.
One of the other take-home points I would have here, too, is that there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I think this is the beautiful thing. A lot of times people get really stuck on the idea that creativity has to happen a certain way. And the truth is it doesn't. That's the cool thing about creativity. There's a lot of different ways to be creative and a lot of different outlets to be creative with. And I think that the idea of fan fiction is just one of those ways, and there are multiple ways within that to be creative. So if you're feeling like you're stuck or you don't know how to be creative, just take a stab at all different formats and all these different ways and just see what works for you and find the communities that are going to support it, because there's a group of people out there that are going to help shape that up and give you feedback and really be supportive to guide you through that.
Yeah, and I think if I were to say anything else on that, it seems like this is just tying together with what you just said, is have fun with it. This is an opportunity. I've never written fan fiction myself, but now I'm kind of inspired to go try, because it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be complex. It's just tell a story based on something you already know and like, and just have fun with it just because you can.
We play this like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of game called Morkborg.
Yeah, I've heard about, you talked about this, I think.
Yeah, we were talking about this, and one of the things, we're writing a campaign for it. That's a lot of fun. And that has been really cool because we get to use the system, but we get to create like our own world with our own monsters and our own kind of like dungeon crawl that goes along with it. And it's been really it's been a lot of fun. And it's based on, like mythologies and like, Lovecraft monsters and stuff like that. And it's really, really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all I have. Should we do some recommendations?
Let's do some recommendations. Recommendations.
At the risk of doing this prematurely, I'm recommending a TV show. And typically it's best, I have found, to not recommend a TV show until its season is complete. But I have been enjoying this TV show so thoroughly, and it may be over by the time this comes out, and I hope that it doesn't jump the shark between now and then, but it feels like with the quality of the content that's out so far, even if the final episodes were bad, the season would still overall be good.
Yeah.
And I don't think the final episodes will be bad. That's the TV show The Last of Us. This is on HBO. Granted, at the time that we're recording this, I've only seen 5 episodes, and I'm not sure how many are planned, but I am completely enamored. I love everything about the show. I think it is going very, very well. I will give a quick warn as far as content. There are a lot of people who die in this on screen. Many of those who die on screen are kids.
Ooh.
So if that's something you can't handle, then you'll probably want to sit this one out. And then there's a lot of sort of mutant body horror stuff that you see. So again, if you're not into that level of scariness, then this probably isn't for you. But if you can handle that, if you liked science fiction and fantasy genres of things and horror, this show is so incredibly well done.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have been raving about episode 3 with good reason. It is a beautiful, extremely well done story that I just probably impacted me the most emotionally of anything I can even think of in recent sort of modern TV or movie history.
Wow. I've heard that about that episode too. So like everybody was talking about that particular episode.
Yeah, understandably. It was amazing. Very well done.
Nice. I love that. It's on my list to watch, so I'm taking that recommendation seriously.
Cool.
All right, so mine is a video game, and this was recommended to me by a buddy of mine, which is hilarious because he's an English teacher, and just thinking about like the kids he teaches and then the game he plays is just funny. So this is a game called Cult of the Lamb. It's super cheap. You know, most video games for like most systems go for like $50 or $60. You can get this for $25. And it's a short little kind of, it's like a Sims game where like you have to kind of like maintain the health and stuff like that. But it's also kind of like this fun action adventure game where essentially it starts off that you are a lamb. Mm-hmm. You're the last lamb on Earth and you are sacrificed to the heretics as part of a cult. Well, when you die, you go to a place that's similar to hell and you are enlisted by the one who waits below. And they are a chained demigod, god type of creature that gives you the power of the red crown, and you return to whatever place this is. Looks like Earth. You return to Earth where you have to start and cultivate a cult.
Wow.
And it is so much fun.
That is a very interesting premise. I'm curious enough that I think I have to at least check it out, if nothing else.
And the thing is like the juxtaposition of this is like the sounds in it are really scary. The music's really scary. Like the monsters are really coolly, like well designed. The problem is it's adorable.
Nice.
Like you are an adorable little lamb running around in like a red like shawl and have like a black and red crown. And every follower that you recruit is also an adorable little animal. And you have to like follow their lead. You're going to have dissenters in your cult that are going to try to drive people away and leave. You have to feed your cult. You have to like support them, give them gifts, bless them. You have to do all kinds of stuff. It's really a lot of fun. Like I'm obsessed with it right now. I have the Cult of Lemmy and I have 7 followers right now.
What platform is this on?
It's on everything, but I play it on Switch.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, fun. So The Last of Us TV show on HBO or HBO Max, and then The Cult of Lamb on whatever platform you prefer to play video games. If you would like to tell us about your fan fiction, please let us know. If you're willing to share, we'd be happy to even post a link on this episode. If you want to drive some traffic to your fan fiction, I'd be interested in reading some of it. Or you can tell us something that we got wrong, or something you loved about what we said about fan fiction. We're happy to hear all of those things. We really like compliments, so you can send those our way.
Yeah, that works.
In addition, you can tell us about TV shows or video games you're into. We're happy to hear those sorts of recommendations as well. And you can get all kinds of bonus stuff about this show. If you were like, well, I wonder what these two look like, or what is it like when we don't hear the final polished version of this that Justin makes sound so good. You can do that by going over to Patreon and joining us there, and there you get access to that bonus content. And a few people have done that already. There's this handy list of people I have here that have joined us on Patreon, to whom I am just endlessly grateful. And that is Amanda, Brad, the Daily BA, Joshua, Justin, Justine, Kelly, Kim, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, and Stephanie. Thank you all for your continued support. Really appreciate you and all that you do. Also, thank you for my team of people that help make this show happen. Thank you to Alan, Jess, Patrick, and Justin, and especially thank you, Shane, for your work on notes today and for recording with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always fun.
And of course, thank you so much to our listeners, without whom this podcast would have no reason to exist. Although, I do have fun doing it, so maybe I would just record it for nobody. But I'm not telling you that. I do it for you. Keep listening, please. If you don't want to join us on Patreon, you can still support us by sending a little cash our way if you go to our merch store and pick up some of our cool stuff and buy that for Valentine's Day gift, or I guess since this is past Valentine's Day, for a St. Patrick's Day gift.
Yes.
If you wish. Or just because it's nice to have nice things, and we've got some nice things over there. In addition, go ahead and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can just click those 5 stars, but if you have time and you want to write a 1 or 2 sentence review about how awesome the show is, we of course always appreciate that information. Oftentimes it seems like we inspire people who don't have nice things to say, and I'm less interested in people who have nothing nice to say. I'll take constructive criticism. That's fine. Speaking of which, if you would like to reach out to us directly, you can email us at info@wwdpodcast.com. Happy to hear from people on our email and respond to you there. And you can always reach out to us on social media. Have I forgotten anything, Shane?
No, I think you covered it all.
All right, perfect. Well, then I think that's all we have. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.